Hey, captive hearts. Get ready for a romance where fate and danger trap two mates together with nowhere to run. When Zara Blackwood, the pack's most independent tracker, is locked in a safe house with Kane Steele, the ruthless enforcer she's spent 3 years avoiding, survival becomes the least of their problems. The blizzard outside isn't the only thing heating up, because in a space barely bigger than a prison cell, with assassins hunting them and only each other for warmth, every heartbeat echoes, every breath mingles, and the mate bond they've both denied is about to explode into something neither can control. They can't escape each other, or the mate bond that's growing stronger every second. Chapter 1. The reinforced steel door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid, and Zara Blackwood's stomach dropped straight through the floorboards. The electronic lock engaged with a series of mechanical clicks that sounded like her freedom dying one beep at a time. 48 hours minimum. Alpha Garrett's voice crackled through the intercom, already growing distant. The Crimson Fong assassins have your scent. This safe house is the only thing standing between you and a slow death. Kane will keep you alive. Zara pressed her back against the cold steel, her wolf pacing anxiously beneath her skin. The safe house was smaller than her studio apartment. One room containing a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a single queen-sized bed that seemed to mock her from across the space. And standing beside that bed, arms crossed and expression thunderous, was the one person in the pack she'd spent 3 years successfully avoiding. Kane Steele. 6 feet 4 inches of pure predator, with storm gray eyes that could freeze blood and shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His dark hair was longer than pack regulation, giving him the look of a warrior fresh from battle, which, considering his job as the pack's enforcer, wasn't far from the truth. "This is a joke," Zara muttered, running her hands through her auburn hair. "There has to be somewhere else." "There isn't." Kane's voice was rougher than gravel, the kind of deep rumble that made her wolf sit up and take notice. Which was exactly why she avoided him in the first place. "Trust me, I'm not thrilled about babysitting you either." Heat flashed through her chest. "Babysitting? I'm the best tracker this pack has ever had. I don't need. You need to stay alive long enough for this mess to blow over." He moved to the small window, checking the locks with methodical precision. Every motion was controlled, economical, like a blade waiting to strike. "The Crimson Fong doesn't send assassins for fun, Zara. Whatever you stumbled onto in their territory has them spooked enough to break the peace treaty." The scent hit her then, pine, steel, and something darker that made her mouth water despite her irritation. Winter storms and barely leashed power. Her wolf responded with a low whine of want that she ruthlessly suppressed. This was exactly why she avoided Kane Steele. 3 years ago, at her first pack gathering, she'd caught his scent across the room and nearly shifted on the spot. The instant attraction had been so strong, so overwhelming, that she'd locked herself in a bathroom stall until it passed. Then she'd spent the next 3 years making sure they were never in the same room for longer than absolutely necessary. The mate bond was real. She wasn't stupid enough to deny that, but she was smart enough to know that wanting someone and being compatible with them were two entirely different things. Kane was the pack enforcer. He lived for order, rules, and absolute control. She was a tracker who thrived in the wild, answering to no one but herself and the wind. Oil and water. Fire and ice. Even if her traitorous wolf thought he smelled like home. "The assassins won't find us here," Kane continued, testing the security panel beside the door. "This place is warded against supernatural tracking, reinforced steel construction, and off the grid. We wait it out, then you go back to your life." "And you go back to yours," she agreed quickly. Too quickly, because something flickered across his expression. Hurt? Disappointment? Before she could analyze it, the look was gone, replaced by his usual stone-cold mask. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Outside, wind howled against the windows, and she could smell the approaching blizzard on the air. Snow was already starting to fall, thick flakes that would soon make the roads impassable. Perfect. Trapped in a box with her mate during a snowstorm. What could possibly go wrong? Kane moved to the small kitchen area, his movements sharp and efficient. There's enough food for a week. Water, basic supplies. Heat should hold as long as the generator has fuel. She watched his hands as he inventoried their supplies. Large, scarred, competent hands that she'd imagined touching her more times than she cared to admit. The thought made her cheeks burn, and she turned away, busying herself with examining the bathroom. Which was a mistake. One sink. One toilet. One shower that looked like it could barely fit one person, let alone two werewolves who needed space to breathe. We'll have to share, Kane said from directly behind her, his voice so close she could feel the warmth of his breath against her neck. She spun around, finding herself trapped between his chest and the doorframe. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could count the small scar above his left eyebrow. His scent surrounded her, making her wolf purr with contentment while her human brain screamed warnings. Share what? The words came out breathier than she intended. Everything. His gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before snapping back up. Space. Resources. Sleeping arrangements. Her heart stopped. Sleeping arrangements? Kane's jaw tightened, and she caught a flash of something hot and dangerous in his eyes before he stepped back, giving her room to breathe. One bed. We're adults. We can handle it. Could they? Because standing this close to him, surrounded by his scent and the barely leashed power that radiated from his skin, she wasn't sure she could handle sharing the same air, let alone a bed. I'll take the floor, she said quickly. No. The word was flat, final. The floor's too cold, and you'll need your strength if we have to run. We share the bed like civilized people. Civilized. Right. Because there was nothing civilized about the way her pulse spiked every time he looked at her, nothing civilized about the fantasies that had kept her awake for 3 years running. A loud crack from outside made them both freeze. Kane moved to the window in 3 quick strides, his body tensing as he peered through the reinforced glass. What is it? She whispered, moving to stand beside him. Tree branch. But... He frowned, scanning the tree line visible through the falling snow. Something's moving out there. Her blood turned to ice. Crimson fawn. Can't tell yet. Could be wildlife. But his hand was already moving to the knife strapped to his thigh, and she could smell the sharp edge of his alertness. They stood side by side at the window, watching the storm gather strength. The space between them crackled with tension, not just from the potential danger outside, but from the awareness that hummed between their bodies like a live wire. Kane, she started, not sure what she wanted to say. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw hunger there, raw and desperate, matching her own. Saw 3 years of careful distance and professional politeness stripped away to reveal the want underneath. Then another sound from outside, definitely not a tree branch this time, had him moving away from her, checking weapons, sliding into full protective mode. Get some rest, he ordered, his voice back to its usual controlled rumble. I'll take first watch. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself, but the exhaustion of the day was starting to catch up with her. The adrenaline crash, combined with being locked in a small space with the scent of her mate, was making her head spin. Wake me in 4 hours, she said, claiming the left side of the bed and trying not to think about how it would feel to have him lying beside her. We'll see. She was too tired to argue. Instead, she curled up on top of the covers, fully dressed, and closed her eyes. But sleep was a long time coming, because even from across the room, she could feel Kane's presence like a physical weight. Outside, the storm raged harder, and somewhere in the darkness, danger waited. But the immediate threat wasn't the assassins or the blizzard. It was the man standing guard beside the window, the one whose scent called to every instinct she possessed, the one she'd have to share a bed with for the next 48 hours minimum. Her mate, whether she wanted him or not. As she finally drifted off, her last conscious thought was the sound of Kane's voice, so quiet she might have imagined it. Sweet dreams, Zara. Chapter 2. Zara woke to the scent of coffee and something that smelled suspiciously like actual food. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she thought she was back in her apartment. Then reality crashed back, the safe house the assassins came. Kane, who was currently standing at the small stove with his back to her, wearing nothing but jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to every muscle of his shoulders and arms. His dark hair was mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something almost domestic about the scene that made her chest tight. "You were supposed to wake me," she said, sitting up and immediately regretting it when her hair fell in tangled waves around her face. She probably looked like she'd been dragged backwards through the woods. "You needed the sleep." He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed slightly. Besides, nothing happened. Whatever was out there moved on. She glanced toward the window. The storm had intensified overnight. Snow was piled halfway up the glass, and the wind sounded like a living thing trying to claw its way inside. How long was I out? 10 hours. 10, she shot to her feet. "Kane, you were supposed to. I don't need as much sleep as you do." Finally, he turned, and she caught her breath. There were dark circles under his storm-gray eyes, and tension lines around his mouth that hadn't been there the night before. He looked like he'd spent the entire night on high alert. "Eggs?" The casual question threw her off balance. "What? Do you want eggs? I found some powdered ones in the supplies." He gestured toward the small pan, where something that actually resembled scrambled eggs was cooking. "There's also coffee, though it's probably terrible." This was surreal. Kane Steele, the pack's most feared enforcer, was making her breakfast. The same man who'd once stared down a group of rogue wolves until they submitted without him saying a single word was asking if she wanted eggs. Yes. Thank you." He nodded and turned back to the stove, and she took the opportunity to study him. Really study him, without the buffer of other pack members or the excuse of having somewhere else to be. He moved with a predator's grace, every motion controlled and purposeful. But there was something else there, something she'd never noticed during their brief encounters at pack meetings. The way he kept glancing toward the door, the unconscious way his body positioned itself between her and any potential threat. He was protecting her. Not just following orders, actually protecting her, like his wolf had claimed her as something precious. The realization made her stomach flip. "How do you take your coffee?" he asked without looking at her. "Black." She moved to the small table, noting how he'd already set out 2 plates, 2 mugs, even found napkins somewhere. "You didn't have to do all this. We have to eat." But there was something careful in his tone, like he was trying not to spook her. When he set the plate in front of her, their fingers brushed, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Kane jerked back like he'd been burned, sloshing coffee over the rim of her mug. "Shit. Sorry." He grabbed one of the napkins, reaching across her to clean up the spill. "Big mistake." Now he was leaning over her, his scent surrounding her, his face inches from hers. She could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Her wolf rose to the surface, pressing against her consciousness with a purr of approval. "Mate," it whispered. "Ours." Kane froze, his hand still gripping the napkin, his eyes locked on hers. The air between them crackled with tension so thick she could taste it. "Zara," he said, her name rough on his tongue. She should pull away. Should make a joke, break the tension, remind them both why they'd spent 3 years avoiding this exact situation. Instead, she leaned closer. Kane's breath hitched, his free hand coming up to hover just beside her cheek, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his palm. "This is a bad idea," he said, but he didn't pull away. "Terrible idea," she agreed, tilting her face toward his hand. The first brush of his fingers against her skin was like lightning. She gasped, and he made a low sound in the back of his throat that went straight to her core. Then, from outside, came the unmistakable crack of a branch breaking under weight. Kane was across the room and armed before she could blink, his entire body shifting into predator mode. The moment was shattered, leaving her breathless and aching. "Stay low," he ordered, moving to the window with fluid grace. She wanted to argue. She was a tracker, damn it, not some helpless civilian, but the look on his face stopped her. This was Kane in full enforcer mode, deadly and focused, and arguing with him right now would only distract him from keeping them alive. He peered through the glass, his body coiled with tension. After what felt like forever, he relaxed slightly.
"Dear," he said.
Small herd moving through, probably spooked by the storm. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by frustration. The interruption had broken whatever spell had been weaving between them, and now Kane was back to his controlled, professional self. "The eggs are getting cold," she said, aiming for normal and missing by miles. He turned back to her, and for a moment, she saw heat flicker in his eyes. Then his mask slammed back into place.
"Right."
Breakfast. They ate in silence, the tension from their almost moment hanging between them like a third presence. Every time she looked up, she found him watching her, but he'd quickly look away, focusing on his food with unnecessary intensity. It was maddening. "So," she said finally, unable to stand the quiet anymore, "how long have you known?" He glanced up sharply. "Known what?" "That we're mates." She met his gaze steadily, tired of dancing around the obvious. "Because I know you felt it. The pull, the recognition. You can't fake that kind of reaction." Kane set down his fork with deliberate care. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. The precision of his answer caught her off guard. "You've been counting?" A muscle in his jaw ticked. "Hard not to, when you've been avoiding me for that long." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I wasn't. You leave every room I enter. You volunteer for assignments that take you out of pack territory whenever I'm scheduled to be around. You haven't said more than 10 words to me since the night we met." His voice was steady, but she could hear the hurt underneath. "If that's not avoidance, what would you call it?" She stared at him, at this man who'd been tracking her movements for 3 years, who'd noticed every slight and dismissal and filed it away like evidence. "Self-preservation," she said quietly. That stopped him cold. "What?" She pushed back from the table, suddenly needing space. But in the small confines of the safe house, there was nowhere to go. "You want to know why I've been avoiding you? Because I knew this would happen. I knew that if I spent more than 5 minutes in a room with you, I'd end up exactly where I am right now." "Which is where, exactly?" She gestured between them, at the charged air and the way her hands shook when she looked at him. "Wanting something I can't have." Kane stood slowly, his movements predatory and fluid. "Can't have or won't take? What's the difference?" "Everything." He stepped closer, and she backed up until she hit the wall. But instead of trapping her, he stopped just out of reach. "Can't have implies it's impossible. Won't take means you're choosing to walk away. I'm choosing to be realistic." The words came out sharper than she intended. "We're not compatible, Kane. You know it as well as I do." "Do I?" "You're an enforcer. You live for rules and order and control. I'm a tracker. I need freedom, space, the ability to make my own choices." She crossed her arms, using them as a barrier between them. "What happens when your need for control runs up against my need for independence? Maybe we find a balance. Or maybe we tear each other apart trying." Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Is that really what you think would happen? That I'd try to cage you?" The question caught her off guard. "I wouldn't you?" "Zara." He said her name like a prayer, like something precious. "You're the best tracker this pack has ever had. You can read sign that others miss, follow trails that have gone cold for days. You move through the forest like you're part of it, like the trees themselves are guiding you." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough with emotion. "Why the hell would I want to change that?" Her breath caught. "Kane, I've watched you work. Watched you disappear into the woods and come back with answers no one else could find. You think I want to lock that away? You think I don't know that caging a wild thing kills it?" The sincerity in his voice, the raw honesty, made her chest tight. This wasn't what she'd expected. For 3 years, she'd built up an image of him in her mind, the controlling enforcer who would demand submission, who would try to remake her into something tame and manageable. But the man standing in front of her, the one who'd counted the days since they'd met, who'd noticed her skills and respected her strength, that wasn't the man she'd been running from. "Then what do you want?" she whispered. Kane's hands clenched at his sides, like he was fighting the urge to reach for her. I want to know what you look like when you smile. Really smile, not the polite version you give everyone else. I want to hear you laugh. I want to know what makes you happy, what keeps you awake at night, what you dream about when you think no one's watching. Each word hit her like a physical blow because they were everything she'd been afraid to want. I want to watch you track, see that look you get when you're following a trail. I want to come home to you after a long day and know that you chose to be there. Not because you have to, not because someone ordered you to, but because you want to be. Her throat was tight, her eyes burning. Kane, I want to be worthy of you, he said simply. And I know I'm not yet, but I want to try. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty of his confession, shattered something inside her chest. For 3 years, she'd been running from a man who didn't exist, while the real Kane, this Kane, who saw her, who wanted her exactly as she was, had been waiting patiently for her to stop being afraid. Before she could lose her nerve, she closed the distance between them. Kane went very still as she approached, like he was afraid any sudden movement would spook her. When she was close enough to feel his body heat, close enough to count his heartbeats, she reached up and touched his face. His eyes drifted closed, and he leaned into her palm like he was starving for contact. I've been an idiot, she said softly.
No.
His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. You've been careful. There's a difference. I've been scared. Of me. Of this. She gestured between them. Of how much I want it. Kane's eyes snapped open, silver fire burning in their depths. Zara. Whatever he was going to say was lost as a new sound reached them from outside, the low rumble of engines, getting closer. They sprang apart, the intimate moment shattered. Kane was already moving, grabbing weapons, checking the security systems. How many? Zara asked, her body shifting into combat mode even as her heart continued to race from their almost kiss. At least 3 vehicles. Maybe more. Kane's voice was grim as he peered through the window. They found us. The Crimson Fong had arrived, and their brief respite was over. But as Kane handed her a knife and took position beside the window, Zara realized something had fundamentally changed between them. The walls she'd built so carefully over 3 years had crumbled in the space of a single conversation. Whatever happened next, she was done running from her mate. Now she just had to survive long enough to explore what that meant. Chapter 3. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence, like a thunderclap. Zara hit the floor as Kane yanked her down, his body covering hers as bullets punched through the reinforced walls. So much for supernatural warding. Apparently the Crimson Fong had come prepared with conventional weapons that could pierce their magical defenses. Back exit, she gasped, her face pressed against the cold concrete floor. Blocked. Kane's voice was deadly calm, even as plaster rained down around them like snow. They've got us surrounded on all sides. Another volley of shots peppered the walls above their heads, and she could hear voices outside, at least 6 distinct speakers coordinating their attack with military precision. The Crimson Fong hadn't just sent assassins, they'd sent a full tactical team. How the hell did they find us? She demanded, army crawling toward the kitchen area as Kane provided covering fire. Doesn't matter now. He squeezed off 3 precise shots through the shattered window, and someone outside screamed in pain. What matters is keeping you breathing long enough to get out of this alive. Keeping us breathing, she corrected sharply, grabbing a knife from the kitchen counter. Kane's storm-gray eyes met hers across the small space, and something hot and fierce passed between them. Acknowledgement, partnership, absolute trust. Us, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. A new voice cut through the chaos outside, cold, female, and dripping with authority that commanded immediate attention. Kane Steele, we know you're in there with the little tracker. Send her out now, and we'll make your death relatively quick and painless. Ice flooded Zara's veins, chilling her from the inside out. They know exactly who we are. This whole thing was planned. Kane's expression darkened with realization, his jaw clenching tight. They didn't just track us here randomly, they knew exactly where Alpha Garrett would send us. They knew about this safe house. The implications hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Someone in their own pack had sold them out. Someone close enough to the Alpha to know about secret safe locations, about emergency protocols, about pack security measures. Someone they trusted. Kane Steele, the female voice called again. Closer now. You have exactly 30 seconds to send out Zara Blackwood, or we're coming and shooting, and trust me when I say we won't aim for anything vital at first. Not happening. Kane called back without hesitation, checking his ammunition with swift efficiency. His voice carried clearly through the bullet-riddled walls, steady and absolutely final. Then you'll both die very, very badly. And it will take a long time. Let them try, Zara muttered under her breath, testing the weight and balance of her knife. But even as she said it, she was calculating odds in her head. 6 heavily armed attackers against 2 werewolves, trapped in a confined space with limited ammunition and no backup coming anytime soon. The mathematics of survival weren't in their favor. Kane must have been running the same calculations, because he caught her eye and jerked his head toward the tiny bathroom. There's a window back there, right? Small one. High up on the wall. Big enough for you to squeeze through? She bristled immediately. I'm not abandoning you here, Zara.
No.
The word came out harder and more final than she'd intended. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. For a moment, Kane looked like he was going to argue, his protective instincts warring with tactical logic. Then his expression shifted, becoming something predatory and fiercely pleased. Together, then. But if we're doing this, we do it exactly my way. Before she could ask what he meant, he was already moving with fluid grace. Kane grabbed a small cylindrical device from his tactical pack, some kind of military-grade smoke grenade, and hurled it through the broken window with perfect accuracy. Thick, choking smoke began pouring into the clearing outside like fog, and immediate shouts of confusion and anger rose from the Crimson Fong assault team. Now, he said, and kicked open the reinforced front door with explosive force. They moved like a single deadly organism, Zara covering his left flank as they burst through the concealing smoke cloud. Her knife found the throat of the first assassin before he even realized. She was there, opening his carotid artery in one smooth slash, while Kane put 2 bullets center mass in another attacker. But there were more enemies waiting. There were always more. A wickedly sharp blade sliced across her ribs, parting fabric and skin, and she spun with the momentum, driving her elbow into her attacker's solar plexus with bone-crushing force. He doubled over, gasping for air, and she finished him with a quick, efficient slash across his throat. Beside her, Kane fought like a force of nature, brutal, efficient, absolutely unstoppable. She'd seen him spar during pack training before, but this was something entirely different. This was Kane protecting his mate, and there was something both terrifying and beautiful about the way he moved through combat. "Behind you," she called sharply, spotting a sniper taking careful aim from the concealing treeline. Kane spun and fired in one impossibly smooth motion, and the sniper pitched forward into the blood-stained snow with a wet thud. The concealing smoke was starting to clear now, and Zara could see their remaining attackers regrouping with professional efficiency. 3 left standing, including the woman who'd been giving orders, a tall, lean redhead with cold blue eyes and vicious scars running down the entire left side of her face. Vera crimson. Kane growled, recognition and old hatred thick in his voice. The scarred woman smiled slowly, showing far too many teeth in an expression that belonged on a shark. "Hello there, Kane. Still playing devoted bodyguard to pack strays, I see. Still bitter about that scar I gave you?" Kane replied conversationally, but Zara could smell the sudden spike of tension rolling off him in waves. Vera's predatory smile turned absolutely vicious. "Oh, I'll be giving you a matching set before this morning is over, I promise you that." She raised her gun with practiced ease, but Zara was already moving, her body acting on pure instinct. Her throwing knife left her hand in a perfect spiral, catching one of Vera's remaining companions in the shoulder and spinning him around like a top. His shot went wide, shattering a tree trunk instead of punching through Kane's skull. Kane used the distraction to close the distance between them, but Vera was fast, faster than any normal human had any right to be. Enhanced somehow, Zara realized with growing dread. The Crimson Fong had been experimenting with supernatural augmentation, pushing human limits beyond their natural boundaries. The fight that followed was brutal, close, and absolutely vicious. Vera matched Kane blow for blow, her chemically enhanced speed and strength making her a legitimate threat even to a werewolf enforcer in his prime. Meanwhile, Zara found herself locked in desperate combat with the remaining assassin, a mountain of muscle who moved like a trained dancer despite his intimidating size. Her ribs were screaming where the blade had opened them up, and she could feel warm blood soaking steadily through her torn shirt. But the metallic scent of her own injury seemed to trigger something deep and primal in Kane's psyche. His fighting style shifted dramatically, becoming less controlled and civilized, more savage and territorial. He caught Vera's wrist as she tried to drive a silver-bladed dagger toward his heart, and the sharp crack of breaking bone echoed clearly across the blood-soaked clearing. Vera screamed in pain and fury, but she didn't drop the deadly weapon. Instead, she switched hands with inhuman speed and slashed viciously toward his exposed throat. Zara moved without conscious thought, throwing herself between them with desperate speed. The silver blade meant for Kane's jugular caught her instead, slicing deep across her collarbone and sending liquid fire through her nervous system. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Silver burned werewolves like concentrated acid, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the sound Kane made in response. It wasn't human. It wasn't even fully wolf. It was something primal and furious and absolutely, utterly deadly. When Vera tried to follow up her attack with another slash, Kane caught her by the throat and lifted her clean off the ground with one hand. For a terrifying moment, Zara thought he was going to snap the woman's neck right there and end it. Kane, she gasped through the burning agony, one hand pressed desperately against her bleeding shoulder. Information first. We need to know who sold us out. Kane's grip tightened until Vera's face began turning an alarming shade of purple. But after a moment that felt like an eternity, he gave a sharp nod of acknowledgement. Talk, he commanded, his voice barely recognizable as human. Who in our pack gave you our exact location? Vera laughed, a sound like broken glass, with blood frothing pink at her lips. Go straight to hell. You first. Kane's claws extended with an audible snick, pressing against the soft skin of her throat. But you get to choose how fast the trip is. Something in his tone, the absolute promise of prolonged agony, must have penetrated Vera's enhanced defiance, because her mocking expression finally wavered. You really don't know, do you? She wheezed. Know what? It wasn't someone in your precious pack. She coughed, spraying more blood across the snow. It was the tracker herself. Ice colder than the winter storm flooded Zara's veins. What are you talking about? The tracking device in your field equipment. We've been following your every movement for months. Every single time you went into the field. Vera's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction, even as she struggled for breath. The world seemed to tilt sideways around Zara. Her tracking equipment, the specialized gear she'd used to follow the trail that led to Crimson Fong territory in the first place, had been compromised. She hadn't discovered their illegal operation through skill and determination. She'd been deliberately led to it. Kane's expression was absolutely murderous as he looked between Vera and Zara. Who planted the surveillance device? But Vera's eyes were already going glassy, whether from blood loss or oxygen deprivation. She was fading fast, and they were running out of time to extract information. Too late, she whispered with her final breath. Already set in motion. Your pack won't survive. What's coming next? Then her head lolled to the side, and she was gone, taking her secrets with her. Kane dropped her lifeless body and immediately turned to Zara, his eyes blazing with protective fury. How bad is the silver cut? She looked down at her shoulder, where silver-contaminated blood was still seeping steadily through her fingers. I'll survive. But Kane, what she said about the pack. We'll figure it out back at headquarters. He was already moving with grim efficiency, checking bodies, securing abandoned weapons. Right now, we need to get that silver cleaned out before it poisons your entire system. The practical concern in his voice steadied her racing thoughts, even as her mind reeled with the terrifying implications. Someone had been using her, manipulating her movements for months, leading her step by step into an elaborate trap that was apparently just the opening move of something much larger and more dangerous. But as Kane helped her back toward the bullet-riddled safehouse, his arms steady and strong around her waist, she realized something crucial had changed between them. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't have to face the unknown alone. They'd fought together like they'd been partners for years, moving in perfect synchronization, trusting each other completely with their lives. Even injured and outnumbered, facing professional killers with military training, they'd emerged victorious. Whatever was coming for their pack next, whatever conspiracy had been set in motion, they would face it together. "Kane," she said as he helped her sit carefully on the edge of the bed and began examining her silver-burned wound. "Yeah." He was completely focused on cleaning the contaminated blood from the cut, his touch infinitely gentle despite the deadly efficiency he'd shown just minutes earlier. "Thank you for not trying to send me away." He paused in his careful ministrations and looked up at her with those storm-gray eyes. "I told you, we do this together. All of it from now on." The promise in his voice made her chest warm despite the throbbing pain in her shoulder. "All of it. Everything," he confirmed without hesitation, pressing a clean bandage firmly to her wound. "The investigation, the fighting, the future, whatever comes next. Whatever you want, Zara. But I'm not letting you face any of it alone." Outside the damaged safehouse, the winter storm was finally beginning to clear, revealing a deceptively peaceful landscape. But Zara knew their real troubles were just beginning. Someone had manipulated her for months, used her own skills and dedication against her, turning her into an unwitting weapon pointed directly at her pack's heart. But sitting here in the aftermath of battle, with Kane's careful hands tending her injury and his protective scent surrounding her like invisible armor, she felt something she'd never truly experienced before. Unshakable hope. They were demonstrably stronger together than either of them had ever been apart. And whatever enemy had orchestrated this elaborate, months-long deception was about to learn exactly what happened when you threatened a mated pair of wolves. "So," she said, wincing slightly as Kane secured the bandage with medical tape, "what's our next move?" Kane's smile was all predator, sharp, dangerous, and absolutely beautiful in its lethal promise. "We go home to pack territory, and then we hunt down whoever's been playing deadly games with our people. Together? Just try and stop me." The challenge in his voice sent heat spiraling through her despite everything they'd just endured. Whatever came next, they would face it as true partners. And she was finally ready for that. Chapter 4. The ride back to pack territory was tense and silent, broken only by the steady hum of Kane's truck engine and the occasional hiss of pain when Zara shifted wrong. The silver burn on her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of how close they'd both come to dying. Kane drove with one eye on the road and one on the rearview mirror, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every few minutes, his gaze would flick to her, checking her color, her breathing, the way she held herself. "I'm fine," she said for the third time in 20 minutes. "You took a silver blade meant for me." His voice was rough, edged with guilt. "You're not fine. It's just a cut." Kane pulled over so abruptly that her seatbelt locked against her chest. He turned to face her, his gray eyes blazing with emotion. "It's not just a cut, Zara. It's silver poisoning. It's you throwing yourself between me and a weapon that could have killed you." His hands were shaking slightly as he reached for her, stopping just short of touching. "You could have died." The raw pain in his voice made her chest tight. "But I didn't. This time." He ran his hands through his dark hair, messing it up further. "God, Zara, when I saw that blade coming for you..." She'd never seen Kane lose control before. Even in the middle of combat, he'd been focused and deadly. But now, sitting in his truck on the side of a deserted mountain road, he looked shattered. "Hey." She reached for him with her good arm, her fingers finding his jaw. "Look at me." He did, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly undid her. "I'm okay. We're both okay. And we did what we had to do. You shouldn't have. I'd do it again. The words came out fiercer than she'd intended. In a heartbeat, Kane. That's what mates do, isn't it? Protect each other. Something shifted in his expression. Is that what we are now? Mates. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. 3 days ago, she would have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. But sitting here, with the scent of his worry surrounding her and the memory of how perfectly they'd fought together still fresh in her mind, there was only one answer. Yes, she said simply. If you want to be. Kane's breath caught. Zara, I know it's complicated. I know we have things to figure out, boundaries to establish. But what happened back there? She gestured vaguely toward the safe house. I've never fought like that with anyone. Never trusted someone that completely in combat. Neither have I. His admission was quiet, almost wondering. So maybe we stop fighting what we both want and see what happens when we actually try. For a long moment, Kane just stared at her. Then, moving carefully so as not to jar her injured shoulder, he leaned across the console and kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Gentle instead of demanding, reverent instead of possessive. His lips moved against hers like he was memorizing the feel of her, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. I want to try, he said. God help me. I want everything with you. The honesty in his voice made her eyes burn. Then we'll figure it out. Together. He nodded and pulled back, but not before pressing one more soft kiss to her lips. We should get you to the pack doctor. That silver needs to be properly cleaned. As he put the truck back in drive, Zara found herself studying his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats, the protective tension that radiated from his shoulders. Kane, yeah. At the safe house, when Vera mentioned the scar, what was that about? His hands tightened on the wheel. Old history. How old? Kane was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. 5 years ago, the Crimson Fong tried to expand into our territory. Vera was leading a scouting party, gathering intelligence on our patrol routes. He paused, checking the mirrors again. I caught her. Something in his tone made her stomach clench. And I should have brought her back for questioning. Should have followed protocol. His jaw ticked. Instead, I let my temper get the better of me. Zara waited, sensing there was more. She'd killed 2 of our juveniles the night before. Ripped them apart just to send a message. Kane's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. One of them was Marcus Chen. He was 17, just presented as a wolf the month before. The other was Sarah Mills, 15, still waiting for her first shift. The names hit her like physical blows. She remembered Marcus, a sweet kid with an infectious laugh and dreams of becoming a teacher. Sarah had been shy, bookish, more interested in her studies than pack politics. Kane, I lost it, he continued, his voice hollow. Completely lost it. Instead of a clean capture, I went for blood. Nearly killed her before I came back to myself. But you didn't.
No.
But I marked her permanently. That scar across her face, that was me. My claws, my rage. He glanced at her, and the guilt in his eyes was devastating. I'm not a good man, Zara. I'm barely a civilized one. The pain in his voice broke something open in her chest. This was what he'd been carrying, the reason for that careful control he maintained. He was afraid of his own capacity for violence, afraid of what he might do if he let himself feel too much. You're wrong, she said quietly. Kane's laugh was bitter. Am I? You saw me back there. You saw what I became when you got hurt. I saw you protecting your mate. She shifted in her seat to face him more fully, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. Kane, what you did to Vera, that was 5 years ago, in the heat of battle, after she'd murdered children. What you did today was controlled, precise. You didn't kill her when you could have. You questioned her first. I wanted to kill her. But you didn't. That's what matters.
Kane shook his head.
You don't understand. I understand that you think you're a monster. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 5 years for losing control once. But Kane, do you know what I see when I look at you? He was quiet, his jaw tight. I see a man who makes breakfast for his mate even when he's exhausted. I see someone who positions his body between me and danger without even thinking about it. I see a protector, a guardian, someone who carries the safety of others like a sacred trust. Zara. I see my mate, she finished firmly. Scars and all. The truck drifted slightly as Kane's grip on the wheel loosened. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I don't deserve you. Lucky for you, it's not about deserving. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. It's about choosing. Every day, over and over again. And I choose you, Kane Steele. The protector and the predator, the gentle hands and the fierce heart. All of you. Kane pulled over again, this time in the parking lot of a gas station, and turned to stare at her with wonder in his eyes. How are you real? He asked, his voice barely audible. Instead of answering, she leaned over and kissed him. This time, there was heat behind it, promise and possession and 3 years of denied want. Kane responded with a low growl, his free hand threading through her hair as he deepened the kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane's eyes were blazing silver, his wolf rising to the surface. Mine, he said, the word rumbling from somewhere deep in his chest. Yours, she agreed, then smiled against his lips. But also mine. His answering smile was fierce and beautiful and absolutely devastating. Always. They would have kissed again, but the sharp ring of Kane's phone cut through the moment. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression darkened. Alpha Garrett, he said, answering on the second ring. We're en route. He fell silent, listening, and Zara watched as his face went through a series of expressions, surprise, anger, and finally grim determination. Understood, he said finally. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to her, his expression grave. What? She asked, though she was already dreading the answer. There's been another attack. 3 pack members dead, 2 missing. Kane's voice was flat, professional. And Zara? One of the missing is Dr. Chin, our pack doctor. Her blood turned to ice. Dr. Chin was Marcus's father, the man who'd held his son's funeral 5 years ago. If the Crimson Fong had taken him. There's more, Kane continued. Alpha Garrett found something at the scene. A piece of tracking equipment. The same model you use. The implication hit her like a physical blow. Not only had someone been using her gear to track her movements, but now they were using it to frame her for attacks on their own pack. Kane, she whispered. They're going to think I...
No.
His voice was absolute, final. No one who knows you would believe that. And anyone who doesn't know you will have to go through me. The fierce protectiveness in his voice steadied her, even as her mind raced with the implications. Someone was systematically destroying her reputation, her standing in the pack.
But why?
We need to get back, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. We need to find out who's doing this. Kane nodded and pulled back onto the road, but not before taking her hand in his. Together, he said, echoing her earlier words. Together, she confirmed. But as they drove toward pack territory and whatever waited for them there, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Someone had orchestrated all of this, the compromised equipment, the safehouse attack, now the frame job. The question was, who had both the access and the motive to destroy her? And more importantly, what did they ultimately want? The answers, she suspected, were going to change everything. Chapter 5. The pack house loomed ahead of them through the windshield like a fortress under siege. What should have been a welcoming sight, the sprawling log and stone structure that had housed the Midnight Ridge pack for over a century, now felt ominous in the gathering dusk. Emergency vehicles lined the circular drive, their red and blue lights painting the snow-covered grounds in harsh, pulsing colors. Kane parked near the medical wing, his jaw tight with tension as he took in the scene. Stay close to me, he said, his voice low and protective. Until we know who we can trust, we don't take any chances. Zara nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her bandaged shoulder. The silver burns still throbbed with each heartbeat, but it was nothing compared to the sick dread pooling in her stomach. Somewhere in that building were pack members who might believe she was responsible for the latest attack. They'd barely made it through the main entrance when Beta Marcus intercepted them, his usually friendly face set in grim lines. Behind him stood 3 other pack members, all warriors, all armed, all watching Zara, with expressions that ranged from suspicion to outright hostility.
Kane. Zara.
Marcus's greeting was notably cooler when he said her name. Alpha Garrett wants to see you both immediately. Conference room 2. How are the wounded? Kane asked, positioning himself slightly in front of Zara as they walked. Alive, barely. Dr. Reeves from the neighboring pack is handling the medical care since. Marcus's voice trailed off meaningfully. Since Dr. Chun was missing.
Possibly dead.
And they thought she was responsible. The conference room was packed when they arrived. Nearly the entire pack leadership was present, their faces a mixture of grief, anger, and barely contained rage. Alpha Garrett stood at the head of the long table, his silver hair disheveled, and his usually immaculate clothes wrinkled. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the few days since they'd left. But it was the evidence spread across the table that made Zara's blood run cold. Her tracking equipment lay disassembled in neat rows, GPS units, scent detectors, trail markers, all the specialized gear that made her the best tracker the pack had ever seen. And there, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights, were small electronic devices she'd never seen before. Sit down, Alpha Garrett said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. They took seats across from the evidence, Kane's presence solid and reassuring beside her. But even his support couldn't stop the whispers that rippled around the room when she sat down. Traitor. Murderer. Should have known better than to trust an outsider. The last one hit like a physical blow. She'd been part of this pack for 8 years, had bled for them, fought for them, nearly died for them on multiple occasions. But in the end, she was still the outsider who'd been brought in as an adult, not born into the pack like the others. Enough. Kane's voice cut through the whispers like a blade, deadly quiet and absolutely final. Anyone who has something to say can say it to my face. The room fell silent, but the hostility remained thick enough to taste. Alpha Garrett picked up one of the small devices from the table, a sophisticated piece of technology barely larger than a coin. Do you know what this is, Zara? She studied it carefully, noting the sleek design, the miniature antenna, the way it was designed to blend seamlessly with standard tracking equipment. Some kind of transmitter? A very expensive, very advanced GPS tracker. Military grade, designed to be undetectable to standard security sweeps. Garrett's eyes were hard as granite. We found 6 of them, integrated so perfectly into your gear that even you didn't notice them. I've never seen those devices before in my life, she said firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Maybe not consciously. This came from Elena Vasquez, the pack's head of security, whose usually warm brown eyes were now cold with suspicion. But the evidence suggests otherwise. What evidence? Kane demanded. Elena activated a tablet, and a map appeared on the wall screen, a detailed satellite view of their territory and the surrounding regions. Red dots marked various locations, connected by a web of colored lines. Every mission Zara has been on in the past 6 months, Elena explained, her voice clinical and detached. Every location she's tracked to, every trail she's followed. And look, she highlighted a series of blue markers. Every single one corresponds to a subsequent Crimson Fong incursion. The room erupted in angry murmurs, but Zara felt like she was watching it all from underwater. The pattern was damning, undeniably so. Every successful tracking mission had been followed by enemy activity in the same area. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? Beta Marcus leaned forward, his expression hard. You're the one person who had access to all these locations. You're the one who knew our patrol routes, our security weaknesses, our response protocols. I would never. Dr. Chun is missing, Elena continued relentlessly. Along with his assistant, Jamie Rodriguez. 3 other pack members are dead, torn apart by claws and fangs. And this, she held up another device, was found clutched in Rebecca Mills's hand when we found her body. Zara's vision blurred. Rebecca had been one of the juveniles, barely 18, and full of dreams about becoming a veterinarian. Now she was dead, and apparently she died trying to identify her killer. "You think I murdered my own pack members?" The words came out hoarse, barely audible. "I think someone did," Alpha Garrett said heavily. "And right now, all the evidence points to you." "The evidence is manufactured," Kane said, his voice cutting through the room like a sword. "Someone has been using Zara, manipulating her movements for months. We have proof." "What proof?" Elena demanded. Kane stood, his presence commanding immediate attention. Vera Crimson herself confirmed it before she died. Zara was being tracked through compromised equipment, led exactly where the enemy wanted her to go. "She's not a traitor, she's a victim." "Convenient," someone muttered from the back of the room. "The only witness is dead." Kane spun toward the voice, his eyes blazing silver. "Are you calling me a liar?" The room fell silent again, but the tension ratcheted higher. Zara could smell the fear and anger radiating from the assembled pack members, could see the doubt in their eyes. Even if Kane's word carried weight, it wasn't enough to overcome the damning evidence spread across the table. "There's more," Alpha Garrett said quietly. "Something else we found." He opened a file folder and spread out photographs, surveillance images that made Zara's stomach drop to the floor. They showed her in various locations, talking to figures whose faces were obscured or turned away from the camera. The timestamps stretched back months. "These were found in Dr. Chen's personal files," Garrett continued. He'd been investigating unusual patterns in pack security, trying to identify potential threats. "And these images suggest—" "They suggest nothing," Kane interrupted, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty as he studied the photographs. "Anyone can doctor surveillance footage." But Zara could see the doubt creeping into his expression, and it cut deeper than any silver blade. Even her mate was starting to question her innocence. "Alpha," a new voice spoke from the doorway, and everyone turned to see Thomas Blackwood, no relation despite the shared surname, the pack's lead investigator. "I have the preliminary forensics report." Garrett gestured him forward, and Thomas approached the table with obvious reluctance. His eyes met Zara's briefly, and she saw pity there, which was somehow worse than the hostility. "The scent evidence from the attack site is conclusive," Thomas said carefully. "The attackers carried Zara's scent, along with traces of the victim's blood." The room erupted again, voices raised in anger and demands for justice. But all Zara could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat as the walls closed in around her. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Kane stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "None of this proves anything. Sense can be transferred. Evidence can be planted. Someone is going to extraordinary lengths to frame Zara, and we're playing right into their hands." "Or," Elena said coldly, "the simplest explanation is the correct one. She's been feeding information to the enemy, and now that we're getting close to the truth, she's trying to cover her tracks." "Elena." Kane's voice carried a warning that made several pack members step back. But Elena didn't back down. "She's not pack-born, Kane. Her loyalty has always been questionable. And now 3 of our people are dead because we trusted the wrong wolf." The accusation hung in the air like poison, and Zara felt something inside her chest crack open. After 8 years of service, of bleeding for this pack, of considering these people her family, this was how they saw her. An outsider whose loyalty was questionable. "That's enough." Alpha Garrett's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Elena, that was uncalled for." But the damage was done. Zara could see it in their faces. The doubt, the suspicion, the willingness to believe the worst of her. Even some of the pack members she'd considered friends were looking at her like she was already guilty. "I need to think," Garrett said finally. "Thomas, Elena, Kane, I want you 3 to continue the investigation. Follow every lead, examine every piece of evidence. Leave no stone unturned." "What about her?" Elena jerked her chin toward Zara. She remains under pack protection until we determine the truth. Garrett's tone was final. House arrest, with Kane as her guard. Alpha, Zara said quietly, finding her voice at last. I know how this looks. I know the evidence is overwhelming. But I swear to you, on the blood oath that bound me to this pack 8 years ago, I am innocent. Garrett studied her for a long moment, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded slightly. I want to believe that, Zara. I really do. But until we can prove it. He gestured to the evidence on the table. My hands are tied. As the meeting broke up and pack members filed out, many shooting hostile glances her way, Zara felt the weight of isolation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd never felt more alone in her life. Until Kane's hand closed over hers. We'll figure this out, he said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. Whoever did this, whoever's behind the frame job, we'll find them. Will we? She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Because for a moment in there, even you looked like you weren't sure. Kane's expression tightened with guilt. The evidence is overwhelming. I'd have to be blind not to see that. But Zara, he turned in his chair to face her fully. I know you. I've watched you for 3 years, fought beside you, seen who you really are. You're not capable of betraying the pack. How can you be so sure? Because betrayal requires deception, and you're terrible at lying. His mouth curved in a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You wear every emotion on your face, broadcast your thoughts with every expression. If you were guilty, I'd know it. The simple faith in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. Even if no one else believes me? Even then. Kane squeezed her hand. You and me against the world, remember? She managed a weak smile in return. That's a lot of world to go against. Good thing we're not planning to go down without a fight. As they left the conference room together, Zara caught sight of Elena watching them from across the hallway. The head of security's expression was unreadable, but something in her stance set off alarm bells in Zara's mind. Kane, she said quietly as they walked toward the residential wing. What if the real traitor is someone we'd never suspect? What do you mean? Elena had access to my equipment. She could have planted those tracking devices during routine inspections. Zara's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. She knows all our security protocols, all our patrol routes. She'd know exactly how to make it look like I was feeding information to the enemy. Kane slowed his steps, his expression thoughtful. Elena's been head of security for 15 years. Her whole family is pack. So? That makes her above suspicion. Zara shook her head. Kane, what if that's exactly what makes her the perfect traitor? Who would question the head of security? They'd reached her apartment door, but Kane made no move to unlock it. Instead, he stood in the hallway, clearly wrestling with the implications of her theory. If you're right, he said slowly, then we're in more danger than we thought. Because Elena has access to everything, security systems, personnel files, emergency protocols. Including the safehouse locations, Zara added grimly. The pieces were falling into place now, painting a picture that was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. If Elena was the traitor, then Zara was innocent. But it also meant their enemy was someone with unlimited access to pack secrets, someone who could manipulate evidence and frame innocent people with ease. We need proof, Kane said finally. We need to be very, very careful, Zara corrected. Because if Elena realizes we suspect her. She didn't need to finish the thought. They both understood the danger they were in. But as Kane finally unlocked her door and they stepped into the relative safety of her apartment, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced since the accusations began. Hope. They had a suspect now, a theory that made sense of the evidence. And more importantly, they had each other. Whatever Elena Vasquez was planning, whatever her endgame might be, she was about to discover that framing an innocent wolf was one thing. Going up against a mated pair was something else entirely. Chapter 6. Zara's apartment had never felt smaller. What had once been her sanctuary, a cozy space filled with books, plants, and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived, now felt like a beautifully appointed prison cell. The knowledge that she was under house arrest, suspected of murdering her own pack members, sat heavy in her chest like a stone. Kane moved through her living space with predatory grace, checking windows, testing locks, his enforcer instincts in full protective mode. He'd been doing security sweeps every hour since they'd arrived 3 hours ago, unable to settle while danger lurked so close to his mate. "You're going to wear a path in my carpet," Zara observed from her position curled up on the couch, watching him pace. "Someone tried to kill you yesterday," Kane replied without breaking stride. "Someone in this building might be planning to finish the job tonight." The casual way he said it made her stomach clench. "You really think Elena would be that bold? If she's desperate enough to frame you for multiple murders, she's desperate enough for anything." Kane paused at the window overlooking the main courtyard, his shoulders tense. "The question is why? What does she gain from destroying you?" That had been haunting Zara since they'd first voiced their suspicions. Elena Vasquez had been part of the pack hierarchy for 15 years, had worked her way up from a junior security position to head of operations through competence and dedication. What could possibly motivate her to betray everything she'd built? "Money," Zara suggested, though it felt hollow even as she said it. "Elena's family has been well provided for. Pack positions pay well, and her mate works in finance." Kane shook his head. "It has to be something else. Something personal." A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Kane was beside her in an instant, his hand moving to the weapon at his hip. "Expecting anyone?" he asked quietly. "No one's supposed to visit. House arrest, remember?" But even as she said it, Zara was rising from the couch, her own hand moving instinctively to the knife she kept hidden in the side table. Another knock, followed by a familiar voice. "Zara? It's me. Let me in." Relief flooded through her as she recognized the speaker. "It's okay," she told Kane, moving toward the door. "It's Sarah Chen." Kane's expression didn't relax. "Dr. Chen's daughter? The one whose father is missing? She's also my best friend in the pack." Zara reached for the deadbolt. "Sarah would never." Kane's hand closed over hers, stopping her. "Sarah would also have access to her father's files. His research into security breaches. His suspicions about pack infiltration." The implication hit her like cold water. Sarah Chen was one of the few people Zara trusted completely, but she was also in a perfect position to know exactly what her father had discovered before he disappeared. "Zara, please." Sarah's voice came through the door again, tight with what sounded like desperation. "I know you're in there. I know what everyone's saying about you, but I have information. Something my father found before he was taken." Kane and Zara exchanged glances. It could be a trap, but it could also be the break they desperately needed. "Stay behind me," Kane ordered quietly, drawing his weapon. Zara nodded and unlocked the door, stepping back as Kane pulled it open in one swift motion. Sarah Chen stood in the hallway, and Zara's heart clenched at the sight of her. The young woman looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect black hair hung limp around her pale face, and her dark eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and grief. She was clutching a tablet against her chest like a lifeline. "Oh, thank God," Sarah breathed, her relief palpable. "I was so afraid you wouldn't see me." "Sarah." Zara stepped around Kane, unable to maintain distance when her friend was clearly suffering. "How are you holding up?" "Terribly." Sarah's laugh was hollow, brittle. "My father is missing, possibly dead, and half the pack thinks my best friend is responsible." She looked between Zara and Kane, taking in their defensive postures. "But I know better."
"How?"
Kane asked bluntly. Sarah held up the tablet. "Because of this. My father's private research files. He was investigating the security breaches for weeks before he disappeared, and he found something. Something that proves Zara's innocence." Hope flared in Zara's chest, but Kane remained skeptical. "What kind of proof?" "Digital forensics." Sarah's voice gained strength as she moved into familiar territory. She was a computer analyst for the pack, specializing in cybersecurity. "My father suspected the tracking devices weren't just monitoring Zara's movements. He thought they were also transmitting false data, creating fake digital trails that would implicate her in security breaches. "Show us," Zara said immediately. Sarah activated the tablet, and a complex array of data streams filled the screen. To Zara, it looked like digital gibberish, but Sarah navigated through it with expert ease. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a series of time-stamped entries. These are GPS coordinates, supposedly generated by Zara's equipment during her mission to the eastern border 3 weeks ago. Zara studied the display, frowning. "That's not right. I never went to half these locations." "Exactly." Sarah's finger moved across the screen, highlighting discrepancies. The tracking devices weren't just monitoring your real movements. They were generating false data points, creating a digital trail that made it look like you were surveilling pack security weaknesses and meeting with unknown contacts. Kane leaned closer, his tactical mind processing the implications. Someone was building a case against her, manufacturing evidence over months. "Not just manufacturing," Sarah continued, her voice gaining urgency. "Look at the metadata embedded in these files. Every piece of false data was uploaded directly to the pack's central security database from an internal terminal." "Which terminal?" Kane asked, though Zara suspected they all knew the answer. "Elena Vasquez's workstation. Every single upload." Sarah's eyes met Zara's. "My father was going to confront her the night he disappeared." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Dr. Chun had discovered Elena's deception, and she'd silenced him before he could expose her. But she needed more time to complete whatever larger plan was in motion, so she'd accelerated the timeline for framing Zara. "We have to take this to Alpha Garrett," Zara said immediately. "We can't." Sarah's expression was grim. "Elena has been feeding the Alpha carefully selected pieces of evidence for weeks, building her case against you. Even if we present this data, she'll claim it was doctored or hacked." "Then what do we do?" Zara asked. Kane was quiet for a moment, his strategic mind working through possibilities. "We need more than digital evidence. We need to catch her in the act." "In the act of what?" "Whatever she's really after." Kane began pacing again, his movements sharp with building energy. This whole elaborate frame job, the months of preparation, the risk she's taken, it's all leading to something bigger. Something that requires you to be discredited or eliminated. Sarah looked confused. What could Elena want that would require framing Zara? But Zara was starting to understand, the pattern becoming clear in her mind. It's not about what she wants. It's about what she's preventing. Both Kane and Sarah turned to look at her. "Think about it," Zara continued, her voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "I'm the pack's best tracker. If someone was planning to infiltrate our territory, to move people or resources without being detected, they'd need to neutralize me first." The Crimson Fong incursions, Kane realized. They weren't random attacks. They were testing our defenses, learning our response patterns. Zara felt sick as the scope of the betrayal became clear. Elena's been feeding them information for months, helping them map our security weaknesses. But they needed me out of the picture before they could make their real move. "What real move?" Sarah asked. Kane's expression was grim. "An invasion. Full-scale assault on pack territory." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Crimson Fong wasn't interested in small incursions or targeted assassinations. They were planning to take over Midnight Ridge pack territory entirely, and Elena was their inside agent. "When?" Sarah whispered. "Soon," Kane said. "The frame job is accelerating. Elena's getting desperate to eliminate Zara before whatever timeline she's working under expires." "We have to warn the pack," Zara said immediately. "With what proof?"
Kane shook his head.
"Elena spent months positioning herself as the loyal protector while making you look like the traitor. She'll deny everything and claim we're fabricating evidence to clear your name. Then we get undeniable proof," Sarah said firmly. "We catch her red-handed communicating with the enemy." Kane studied the young woman with new respect. "That's extremely dangerous. If Elena realizes you're investigating her." "She killed my father," Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried steel underneath. "Or helped them take him. Either way, I'm not walking away from this." Zara felt a surge of gratitude and terror. Sarah was willing to risk everything to help clear her name, but the danger was enormous. Elena had already demonstrated that she was willing to kill to protect her secrets. "If we do this," Kane said slowly, "we do it my way. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures. We gather evidence and get out."
How?
Zara asked. Kane's smile was sharp and predatory. "Elena's been playing a long game, building her case against you carefully and methodically. But every criminal makes mistakes when they're under pressure." "What kind of pressure?" "The kind that comes from discovering your carefully laid plans are unraveling." Kane moved to the window, studying the courtyard below. "Sarah, can you access Elena's workstation remotely?" "If I can get physical access to her terminal for about 30 seconds, I can install a monitoring program," Sarah confirmed. "It would record every keystroke, every file access, every communication. And if she's in contact with the Crimson Fong, we'll have proof," Zara finished. Kane nodded. "But it means breaking into the security office. High risk, high reward." "I'm in," Sarah said immediately. "So am I," Zara added. Kane looked like he wanted to argue, but he seemed to understand that both women had passed the point where they were willing to sit on the sidelines.
"Then we do this tonight."
"Elena will be expecting us to lie low, to act like suspects under house arrest. She won't be prepared for us to go on the offensive." As they began planning their infiltration of the security office, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced since the accusations began, a sense of purpose. They were done being reactive, done letting Elena control the narrative. It was time to hunt the real traitor. But as Kane outlined their plan of attack, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they realized. Elena had been planning this operation for months, had anticipated and countered every possible threat. Except one. She hadn't counted on Zara finding her mate, on having someone who believed in her innocence absolutely and would fight beside her no matter the cost. That might be enough to tip the scales. It had to be. Because if they failed tonight, Elena's larger plan would succeed, and the pack Zara had called home for 8 years would be destroyed from within. "Ready?" Kane asked, checking his weapons one final time. Zara looked at Sarah's determined expression, felt Kane's solid presence beside her, and made her choice. "Let's go hunting." Chapter 7. The pack house felt different at 2 in the morning. Shadows stretched longer. Every creak of the old building seemed amplified, and the familiar warmth of pack scents was overlaid with something darker. Tension.
Fear.
The metallic tang of spilled blood that still lingered from the recent attack. Zara pressed herself against the wall of the maintenance corridor, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed somewhere above them. Beside her, Kane was a statue of controlled stillness, every sense focused on the approaching danger. Sarah crouched behind them, her laptop bag clutched tight against her chest like armor. "Security patrol," Kane breathed, so quietly the words were barely disturbed air. 2 guards, heading for the East Wing. They waited in absolute silence as the footsteps passed overhead and faded into distance. Only when Kane gave the all-clear signal did they continue moving through the narrow service passages that ran like arteries through the pack house's bones. Zara had explored these hidden corridors as a teenager during her first months with the pack, when homesickness and uncertainty had driven her to seek out quiet spaces where she could be alone. She'd never imagined she'd be using them to break into the security office to expose a traitor. "How much further?" Sarah whispered. 50 meters, Zara replied, navigating by memory and instinct. The maintenance access to Elena's office should be just ahead. Kane moved point, his weapon drawn and ready. Despite the danger, despite the impossibility of their situation, Zara felt a strange sense of rightness moving beside him like this. They functioned together with an efficiency that went beyond training or experience. It was the mate bond translating into perfect tactical synchronization. The access panel appeared ahead of them, exactly where Zara remembered it. Kane examined the lock with professional interest. "Standard magnetic seal," he murmured. "Sarah, can you bypass it?" "Give me 30 seconds." Sarah was already pulling electronic tools from her bag, her movements sure despite the stress. Her father had taught her well before his disappearance. While Sarah worked, Zara found herself studying Kane's profile in the dim emergency lighting. Even focused on their mission, he remained hyper-aware of her position, his body angled to shield her from potential threats. The protective instinct was unconscious, automatic. He probably wasn't even aware he was doing it. "Got it," Sarah said as the lock disengaged with a soft click. Kane eased the panel open, revealing Elena's office beyond. The space was dark except for the glow of computer screens and the red LED of the security system's active status. Equipment hummed quietly, servers, monitors, and communication arrays that formed the nerve center of PAC security. "She's not here," Kane confirmed after a careful scan of the room. They slipped through the access panel one by one, Sarah immediately heading for Elena's workstation, while Kane took position by the main door. Zara moved to the windows, watching for any sign that their infiltration had been detected. "How long do you need?" Kane asked Sarah, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 minutes to install the monitoring software, maybe 10 to access her recent files. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. If she's been communicating with the Crimson Fong, there should be traces in her system. Zara kept watch, her senses stretched to their limit. The pack house felt wrong tonight, too quiet in some places, too active in others. Almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Kane," she said softly. "Something's not right." He glanced at her, reading the concern in her expression. "What kind of not right?" "The security patrols. They're moving in patterns I don't recognize." Zara frowned, trying to articulate the wrongness she was feeling. "Elena runs night security. She'd know exactly when and where the guards would be." The implication hit them both at the same time. If Elena was expecting them, if she'd somehow anticipated their move against her. "Sarah," Kane said urgently. "How much longer?" "Almost done. Just need to." Sarah's voice cut off as new data began scrolling across her screen. "Oh my God."
What?
Zara moved away from the window, abandoning her watch position. "These communication logs," Sarah whispered, her face pale in the monitor's glow. "Elena's been in contact with the Crimson Fong for over a year. But look at the timestamps on these messages." Zara leaned over Sarah's shoulder, studying the encrypted communications that were slowly being decoded by Sarah's software. What she saw made her blood run cold. The messages weren't old. They were recent, some from just hours ago. And they were talking about tonight. "The wolf is cornered," read one message from Elena's account. "Package will be delivered as scheduled. Recommend immediate extraction once objective is complete." "What package?" Kane demanded, reading over their shoulders. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more files. "They're shipping manifests, delivery schedules, equipment transfers." Her voice was tight with growing alarm. "Elena's been smuggling something into PAC territory. Something big enough to require multiple shipments over several months." "Weapons," Zara suggested. "Worse," Sarah said, her face going ashen. "Look at these chemical composition reports." The data that filled the screen made Zara's stomach drop. Explosives. Military-grade compounds designed for maximum structural damage. Enough to level several buildings, or collapse an entire underground tunnel system. The den, Kane realized. They're going to blow up the communal den. The communal den was the heart of PAC territory, a vast underground complex where families lived, where children played, where the most vulnerable members of the PAC sought shelter during emergencies. It was also where most of the PAC would be right now, sleeping peacefully, trusting their security systems to keep them safe. "How many people?" Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer would be devastating. "Nearly 300, Zara said, her voice hollow. "Including the nursery wing." The scope of Elena's betrayal hit them like a physical blow. This wasn't just about eliminating a potential threat or even helping the Crimson Fong take territory. This was genocide, the complete destruction of the Midnight Ridge PAC. "When?" Kane demanded. Sarah pulled up more files, her movements frantic now. "According to this timeline, the explosives are already in place. They're waiting for..." She stopped, her face going white as death. "What?" "They're waiting for the all-clear signal." When Elena confirms that the primary threats have been neutralized, Sarah's voice was barely audible.
Us.
They're waiting for confirmation that we're dead. The trap was suddenly, horribly clear. Elena hadn't just anticipated their infiltration of her office. She'd counted on it. She'd left enough evidence to draw them here, to the exact location where she could eliminate them and then give the Crimson Fong the signal to detonate their bombs. "We need to get out of here," Kane said, moving toward the access panel.
Now.
But as he reached for the panel, it swung shut with a final sounding click. The magnetic lock engaged with an electronic whine, sealing them inside. "Too late," said a familiar voice from the main doorway. Elena Vasquez stepped into the office, flanked by 4 armed figures in Crimson Fong tactical gear. Her weapon was trained on Kane, but her cold smile was directed at Zara. "Hello, traitor," Elena said conversationally. "I was wondering when you'd finally put the pieces together." Zara felt Kane tense beside her, preparing to fight, but the odds were impossible. 4 armed enemies with automatic weapons against 3 people with limited cover and no avenue of escape. "Elena," Kane said carefully, his voice steady despite their desperate situation. "You don't have to do this." "Oh, but I do." Elena's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "You see, the Crimson Fong doesn't just want territory. They want complete annihilation of the pack that killed their alpha's son 15 years ago." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. 15 years ago, the Midnight Ridge Pack had been forced to execute a rogue Crimson Fong wolf who'd been systematically hunting human children. The execution had been lawful, necessary, but it had created an enemy who'd spent over a decade planning revenge. Vera was Magnus Crimson's daughter, Zara realized. "And you've been working for them since the beginning." "Since my mate was killed in the border skirmishes 10 years ago," Elena corrected, her voice turning bitter. "The pack promised justice, promised they'd hunt down his killers. But they were too busy protecting their precious territory to care about one dead wolf." "So you sold us out," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. "You killed my father. You murdered innocent people." "I did what was necessary," Elena replied coldly. "And now, with the 3 biggest threats to our operation eliminated, the final phase can begin." She raised a radio to her lips, prepared to give the signal that would murder 300 innocent pack members in their sleep. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated what a mated pair of wolves would do to protect their family. Kane moved first, a blur of deadly speed that covered the distance between them in heartbeats. His tackle sent Elena crashing into her backup, disrupting their formation and buying precious seconds. Zara was right behind him, her knife finding the throat of the nearest Crimson Fong operative before he could bring his weapon to bear. Sarah dove behind the desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked desperately to override the building's security systems. The fight was brutal, close quarters, and absolutely desperate. These weren't the enhanced assassins from the safehouse. These were professional soldiers with military training and overwhelming firepower. But they were fighting in a confined space against opponents who had everything to lose. Kane fought like a force of nature, all controlled violence and predatory grace. But there were too many opponents and they were running out of time. Every second that passed brought Elena closer to giving the signal that would destroy their entire world. "Sarah?" Zara called out, parrying a knife thrust and responding with one of her own. "The emergency broadcast system." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. Instead of trying to stop Elena's communication, she could use the pack's emergency alert network to warn everyone, to get them out of the den before the explosives detonated. "I need 30 seconds. Sarah called back. "You've got them," Kane replied grimly, disarming another opponent and putting him down permanently. But Elena was back on her feet now, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, her radio in hand. She smiled at Zara with pure malice. "Too late," she said, and pressed the transmission button. "Execute," Elena said into the radio. And somewhere beneath their feet, in the tunnels that honeycombed the pack's underground den, 300 innocent people continued sleeping, completely unaware that their world was about to end. Unless Sarah could warn them in time. Unless Kane could stop Elena's backup plan. unless Zara could find a way to turn this desperate situation into something resembling hope. The next few minutes would determine whether the Midnight Ridge Pack survived the night, or whether Elena's 15-year quest for revenge would finally succeed. But as Zara met Kane's eyes across the chaos of the fight, she saw the same fierce determination reflected there that burned in her own chest. They'd come too far, fought too hard, and lost too much to give up now. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 8. The emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the pack house exactly 17 seconds after Sarah's fingers found the right sequence of commands. The sound cut through the night like a blade, piercing and urgent, designed to wake even the deepest sleeper and send them running for safety. But 17 seconds might not be enough. How long until detonation? Zara shouted over the chaos, driving her knife between the ribs of a Crimson Fawn operative who'd been trying to flank Kane. Standard military explosives, underground placement. Sarah's voice was strained as she worked frantically at the computer while staying low behind the desk. Maybe 3 minutes from signal transmission to full structural collapse. 3 minutes for 300 people to evacuate a complex underground tunnel system. It was impossible. Even with the emergency protocols they drilled countless times, even with the klaxons screaming warnings, it couldn't be done. Unless someone could delay the explosions. Kane seemed to reach the same conclusion at exactly the same moment because his fighting style shifted from defensive to something far more desperate and aggressive. He caught the last standing Crimson Fawn soldier by the throat and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack concrete. "Where are the explosives?" Kane demanded, his voice carrying the full authority of his wolf. "Exact locations." The soldier just smiled, blood running from his split lips. "Go to hell, Enforcer." Kane's claws extended, pressing against the man's jugular. "You first." But Elena laughed from where she'd collapsed against the wall, clutching her wounded shoulder. "It doesn't matter if you find them. The charges are on independent timers now. Tamper with one, and they all detonate immediately. Fail-safe protocol." Zara felt her heart sink. Even if they could locate the explosives, any attempt to disarm them would trigger an instant detonation. Elena had planned for every contingency, except one. "Sarah," Zara called out, an idea forming in her desperation. "The emergency evacuation routes, can you map them against the explosive locations?" Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up building schematics and cross-referencing them with the data they'd found in Elena's files. "Yes, but..." Her voice cut off as the information processed. "Oh God. Zara, they've placed charges at every major exit point." The true horror of Elena's plan became clear. This wasn't just about destroying the underground den. It was about ensuring no one could escape alive. The explosives were positioned to collapse the tunnels, trap the evacuation routes, and turn their sanctuary into a tomb. "How long now?" Kane asked grimly. 2 minutes, maybe less." 2 minutes for an impossible rescue. Zara's mind raced through options, discarding each one as quickly as it formed. There had to be something, some factor Elena hadn't accounted for, some weakness in her perfect plan. The pack house shuddered around them as the first charges detonated somewhere deep below. Not the main explosives, preliminary blasts designed to weaken support structures and ensure maximum damage when the bigger bombs followed. "The old mining tunnels," Zara said suddenly. Kane looked at her sharply.
What?
"The original silver mine shafts that run under the territory. They were here before the pack house was built. Most people have forgotten about them." Zara's words came out in a rush as the plan crystallized. "Elena would know about them, because they're not on any official building plans." "But you know where they are," Kane said, understanding immediately. "I explored them when I first arrived. Got lost for 6 hours before I found my way out." Zara was already moving toward the sealed access panel, examining the magnetic lock that held them prisoner. "If we can get down there, we can guide the evacuation through the old tunnels." Sarah looked up from her computer, hope flickering in her eyes. The main shaft connects to 3 different exit points on the surface, all of them outside Elena's blast radius. "Assuming we can get out of this room," Kane pointed out, gesturing toward the sealed panel. Zara studied the lock mechanism, her mind working through possibilities. Standard magnetic seal, powered by the building's electrical system, controlled by... Sarah, can you access the building's power grid? Already on it. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. If I can create a localized power surge, it should overload the magnetic seals throughout the section. Do it. But Zara, the surge will also disable the emergency lighting, the communication systems. And give us cover to move. Kane finished the thought. How long until the next round of explosions? Another shudder ran through the building, stronger this time. Elena's smile widened as she watched them scramble for solutions. 90 seconds, she said conversationally. And even if you somehow manage to reach the evacuation areas, you'll never guide 300 panicked people through abandoned mine shafts in complete darkness. She was right, and they all knew it. But as Zara met Kane's eyes across the chaos-filled office, she saw her own determination reflected there. They might not be able to save everyone, but they had to try. Sarah, do it, Zara ordered. Here we go. Sarah's finger hovered over the enter key. Power surge in 3, 2, 1. The lights died. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red, but the magnetic seals had been overloaded. The access panel swung open with a mechanical groan. They moved as one, Kane first, weapon ready, then Zara, with Sarah bringing up the rear with her laptop clutched against her chest. Behind them, Elena's voice carried through the darkness, cold with absolute certainty. You're too late. Even if you reach them, you can't save them all. Maybe not, Zara thought as they raced through the maintenance corridors. But she'd rather die trying than live knowing she'd given up. The emergency klaxons were deafening in the narrow spaces, and she could hear other sounds now. Voices raised in panic, the thunder of running feet, the chaos of 300 people trying to evacuate through passages that were about to become death traps. This way, Zara called, taking the lead as they reached a junction she remembered. The old mining access was hidden behind a maintenance hatch that looked exactly like dozens of others throughout the building. She found it through memory and instinct, her fingers working by feel to open the concealed entrance. Cool air flowed up from below, carrying the musty scent of ancient stone and forgotten spaces. How far down? Kane asked, peering into the darkness. 20 feet to the main shaft, then maybe 50 yards to the first intersection. Zara was already climbing down the rusted ladder, moving as fast as she dared. The tunnels are narrow. We'll have to guide people through in small groups. They reached the bottom just as another massive explosion shook the building above them. This one was different, bigger, more destructive. Dust rained from the tunnel ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the rumble of collapsing masonry. The main charges, Sarah whispered. They're starting to detonate. Kane activated a tactical flashlight, cutting through the oppressive darkness. The beam revealed rough-hewn stone walls, support timbers that had seen better decades, and a tunnel that stretched away into black uncertainty. Can you find the evacuation areas from here? He asked Zara. I think so. The main shaft runs parallel to the underground complex for about 100 yards. She oriented herself by memory, trying to match her recollections of the old mine to the building plans she'd studied countless times. If we can break through at the right points, we can create new exits, Kane finished. More explosions echoed from above, closer now, and the emergency klaxons were joined by new sounds, screams, cries for help, the crash of falling debris. The evacuation was turning into a disaster, and they were running out of time. Split up, Zara decided. Kane, you're strongest. Work on breaking through to the main evacuation corridor. Sarah, can you use your laptop to guide people once we create the openings? If I can get a signal down here, yes. Sarah was already checking her equipment. The pack's emergency communication network should still be functional. Kane nodded grimly and moved deeper into the tunnel, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. Zara could hear him counting distance under his breath, calculating the best place to break through to the complex above. Another explosion, and this time chunks of stone fell from the ceiling around them. Whatever structural damage Elena's charges were causing, it was spreading. They had minutes at most before the entire underground complex became uninhabitable. "Here," Kane called from up ahead. "This should put us directly under the main corridor." Zara joined him, studying the stone and timber construction above their heads. It was solid, built to last, but Kane was an enforcer. His strength went far beyond human limits. "Stand back," he warned, and then his fist connected with the ceiling in a blow that sent spiderweb cracks racing through the stone. 3 more strikes, each one harder than the last, and suddenly they could hear voices from above, panicked, frightened voices calling for help. "Down here," Zara shouted up through the growing hole. "There's a way out down here." The first face appeared in the opening moments later, a woman Zara recognized from the packed kitchens, her eyes wide with terror. "Zara? But you're supposed to be innocent," Zara finished grimly. "Elena Vasquez is the traitor. She's the one who set the bombs. But we can argue about it later. Right now, we need to get everyone out." Understanding dawned in the woman's expression, followed quickly by hope. "How many people can you take?" "As many as we can manage," Kane replied, already helping the first evacuees down into the tunnel. "But they'll need to move fast and stay calm. These passages are old and narrow." What followed was controlled chaos, a desperate chain of humanity passing through the ancient mining tunnels while explosions continued to rock the world above them. Zara moved back and forth between the evacuation point and the tunnel exit, guiding groups of frightened pack members through passages that hadn't seen human traffic in decades. Children, elderly wolves who moved slowly but with quiet dignity, wounded pack members who'd been injured in the initial blasts, they all passed through the old mine like ghosts fleeing a nightmare. "How many more?" Kane called from the breach point, his voice hoarse from shouting instructions. "Maybe 40, Sarah replied, monitoring the evacuation through her laptop's connection to the emergency network. "But Zara, we got a problem." "What now?" "The explosions are destabilizing the tunnel system. These old passages weren't designed to handle this kind of structural stress." Sarah's screen showed architectural damage assessments that painted a terrifying picture. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before the mine shafts start collapsing too. 5 minutes to move 40 people through narrow tunnels that were about to become death traps themselves." The mathematics were impossible. But as Zara looked at Kane, saw the absolute determination in his storm gray eyes, she knew they were going to try anyway. Because that's what mates did. They protected their family, no matter the cost. "Get them moving," she told Kane. "I'll cover the rear. Make sure no one gets left behind." "Zara." "Together," she reminded him. "Whatever happens, we do this together." Kane nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Then he was moving again, helping the last of the evacuees into the tunnel, while the world continued to fall apart around them. Behind them, Elena's 15-year quest for revenge raged on, turning their home into a monument to hatred and loss. But ahead of them, in the ancient darkness of forgotten mining tunnels, hope still flickered. They just had to stay alive long enough to reach it. Chapter 9. The rumble started deep in the earth, a grinding sound like the bones of the mountain shifting. Zara felt it through the soles of her feet first, then rising up through her legs as the ancient mining tunnel began to shake apart around them. "Move!" Kane's voice cut through the chaos as timber supports groaned overhead. "Everyone move now." The last group of evacuees, 15 pack members including 3 children, was strung out through the narrow passage like beads on a string. Behind them, the sound of collapsing stone grew louder, closer, as Elena's explosives finally achieved their intended purpose, the complete destruction of the underground complex. Zara brought up the rear, her flashlight cutting through dust-filled air as she made sure no one was left behind. Her lungs burned with each breath, and her wounded shoulder screamed in protest every time she had to help someone navigate a difficult section of tunnel. But they were almost there. The main exit was just ahead, where Kane had already broken through to the surface and was hauling people up into the blessed open air. "Aunt Zara." A small voice called from behind her, and she spun to see 5-year-old Tommy Chen, Dr. Chen's youngest son, stumbling over loose rocks as the tunnel shook around them. Without hesitation, Zara scooped him up, ignoring the fire that shot through her shoulder. "Hold on tight, sweetheart." The tunnel lurched sideways, and she stumbled, her free hand catching against the wall as stones rained down from above. Through the chaos, she could hear Kane calling her name, his voice tight with fear.
Zara.
"Where are you?" "Coming," she called back, but her voice was lost in the thunder of collapse. The ancient support beam above Tommy's original position chose that moment to give way entirely, crashing down in an explosion of splinters and stone. If they'd been 3 seconds slower, if she hadn't heard his call, she didn't let herself finish that thought. Instead, she ran, carrying Tommy through a passage that was disintegrating around them, following the distant light that marked safety and Kane's desperate voice calling her home. The exit opened ahead of them like salvation, a rough hole in the hillside where Kane waited with his arms outstretched. Behind him, she could see the evacuated pack members gathered in the tree line, safe, but watching with terrified eyes as their home burned behind them. "Jump," Kane ordered as the tunnel gave one final, shuddering groan. Zara didn't hesitate. With Tommy clutched against her chest, she leaped for Kane's waiting arms just as the passage collapsed completely behind them. His strength caught them both, pulling them up and out into the cold night air as tons of stone and timber crashed down into the space they'd occupied moments before. For a heartbeat, they simply held each other, Zara, Kane, and Tommy pressed between them, while the mountain settled into its new configuration and the pack house burned against the horizon. "Is everyone out?" Zara asked when she could finally speak. "Everyone," Sarah confirmed, joining them with her laptop clutched against her chest. Final count shows 297 evacuated through the tunnels, plus the night shift who are already on the surface. 300 people. They'd actually done it, saved everyone through an evacuation route that shouldn't have existed, led by a woman the pack had believed was a traitor just hours before. "Zara." Alpha Garrett's voice carried across the hillside, and she turned to see him approaching with the rest of the pack leadership. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear as they met hers. "Alpha," she said, unsure what else to say. The last time they'd spoken, he'd been placing her under house arrest on suspicion of murder. "I owe you an apology," Garrett said simply. "Several apologies, actually. But first," he looked around at the evacuated pack, at the destroyed building that had been their home, at the 3 people who'd made the impossible rescue happen. "Thank you. All of you. You saved us." Kane stepped forward, his arms still around Zara's waist. "Elena Vasquez was the traitor, Alpha. She's been working with the Crimson Fong for over a year, planning this attack." "Elena's dead," Garrett replied grimly. "We found her body in the security office when we went back for survivors. Looks like she was caught in her own explosions." Zara felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. Relief that the threat was over, sadness for the woman Elena had been before grief twisted her into something monstrous, and a strange sense of closure. "What about the other Crimson Fong operatives?" Sarah asked. "Dead or captured," Garrett confirmed. "It seems Elena's death triggered some kind of failsafe. Her remaining contacts went dark immediately. We may never know the full extent of their network, but the immediate threat is over." As if summoned by his words, the first rays of dawn began to appear over the eastern mountains, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful and terrible, the sunrise after the longest night of their lives. "So what now?" someone called from the crowd of evacuees. Alpha Garrett straightened, his natural authority reasserting itself. "Now we rebuild. We mourn our losses. We care for our wounded, and we make our pack stronger than it ever was before."
His eyes found Zara again.
"And we make sure that the wolves who saved us are properly recognized for their courage." Chapter 10. 3 weeks after the night the pack house burned, Zara stood in the ruins of Elena's office, sifting through the debris for any remaining evidence. The investigation was nearly complete, but Alpha Garrett had asked her to do one final sweep, partly for thoroughness, partly as a gesture of trust. The space was barely recognizable. What had once been the nerve center of pack security was now a blackened shell, open to the sky where the roof had collapsed. But among the wreckage, she'd found fragments of Elena's real plan, encrypted files that painted a picture of betrayal stretching back years. Finding anything useful? Kane's voice came from behind her, and she turned to smile at him. Pieces of the puzzle, she replied, gesturing to the tablet where she'd been cataloging evidence. Elena's network was bigger than we thought. She had contacts in 3 other packs, all of them feeding information to the Crimson Fong. Kane moved to stand beside her, his presence automatically making her feel more centered. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of investigation, reconstruction planning, and slowly rebuilding trust with the pack members who'd believed her guilty. "Any sign of Dr. Chen?" he asked quietly. Zara's expression darkened. That was the one failure that haunted her. They still hadn't found any trace of Sarah's father or his assistant. Elena's files suggested they'd been taken to a Crimson Fong facility for interrogation, but the location remained a mystery. Nothing yet. But Sarah's convinced he's still alive, and I trust her instincts. Speaking of Sarah, Kane gestured toward the hillside where the temporary pack settlement had been established.
She wanted to talk to you about something.
Something about the future. Zara followed his gaze to where Sarah was setting up a new computer workstation in the medical tent. The young woman had thrown herself into reconstruction efforts with almost manic energy, as if staying busy could help her deal with her father's absence. Any idea what she wants to discuss? Kane's smile was mysterious. You'll have to ask her yourself. But I think you'll like what she has to say. They picked their way through the ruins together, Kane automatically steadying her when she stumbled over loose debris. The simple gesture was unconscious now. The mate bond had settled into something comfortable and natural, a partnership that required no thought or effort. Zara. Sarah looked up as they approached, her face brightening. Perfect timing. I wanted to run something by you. What's on your mind? Sarah gestured to the tablet in front of her, which showed architectural plans and budget projections. I've been working with Alpha Garrett on the reconstruction plans, and we have an idea. Something that would prevent another Elena situation from ever happening again. Zara studied the display, noting the sophisticated security systems and redundant oversight protocols. This looks comprehensive. What's my role in it? Head of security, Sarah said without preamble. Full authority over all pack safety measures, with a mandate to implement whatever systems you think are necessary. The offer caught Zara completely off guard. Sarah, I'm a tracker, not a security specialist. You're also the person who uncovered Elena's betrayal and saved 300 lives, Kane pointed out. I can't think of anyone better qualified. Think about it, Sarah continued. You have the tracking skills to monitor threats, the tactical experience to coordinate responses, and, she glanced meaningfully at Kane, the personal connections to ensure loyalty. The implication was clear. As Kane's mate, Zara's dedication to the pack's welfare was beyond question. It was also a recognition of how their partnership had functioned during the crisis, 2 different skill sets combining into something more effective than either could have achieved alone. I'd want Kane as my second, Zara said immediately. Already discussed with Alpha Garrett, Sarah confirmed. He's enthusiastic about the idea of a mated pair running pack security. Says it ensures absolute trust and coordination. Zara looked at Kane, reading the hope in his storm-gray eyes. This would mean working together officially, using their natural partnership in service of their pack's protection. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. When would we start? She asked. Sarah's grin was brilliant. Immediately, if you're willing. We've got temporary facilities to secure, investigation protocols to establish, and about a dozen other packs who want to consult with us about improving their own security. The idea of their story spreading, of other packs learning from the Midnight Ridge experience, was both daunting and appealing. If they could prevent even one other pack from suffering Elena's betrayal, we'll do it, Zara decided, not needing to confirm with Kane. She could feel his agreement through their bond, warm and steady and absolutely certain. Excellent. Sarah made notes on her tablet. Oh, and one more thing. Alpha Garrett wants to make the announcement at the mate ceremony. What mate ceremony? Zara asked, though her heart was already starting to race. Kane's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt like a promise. The one where we make this official. In front of the whole pack, with all the traditional ceremonies. The offer took her breath away. A formal mating ceremony was more than just a celebration. It was a public declaration of permanent partnership, recognized by the pack and binding in ways that went far beyond human marriage. Kane, she started, not sure how to voice the emotions flooding through her. I know we haven't talked about it formally, he said quickly. And I know we've barely had time to process everything that's happened. But Zara, I can't imagine my life without you in it. These past few weeks, working beside you, seeing how perfectly we function together, he paused, his voice becoming rough with emotion. I want it all. The partnership, the future, the pack knowing that you're mine and I'm yours. Yes, she said before he could finish, the word tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. Yes to all of it. Kane's smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious features into something that stole her breath. Around them, she could hear Sarah making pleased noises and other pack members beginning to take notice of what was happening. But all that mattered was Kane, and the way he looked at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. When, she asked. Tomorrow night, Sarah interjected cheerfully. If that's okay with you both. Alpha Garrett thought it would be good for pack morale to have something to celebrate after everything we've been through. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours to prepare for the most important ceremony of her life. It should have felt rushed, overwhelming. Instead, it felt exactly right. Tomorrow night, Zara agreed, squeezing Kane's hand. But I get to help plan the security arrangements. Kane laughed, the sound rich and warm in the mountain air. I wouldn't dream of stopping you. Chapter 11. The mate ceremony was held in the natural amphitheater on the north slope of the mountain, where pack gatherings had taken place for over a century. Ancient pine trees formed a natural circle around the space, their branches hung with lights that twinkled like stars against the darkening sky. Zara stood at the edge of the gathering, watching pack members find their seats on logs and blankets spread across the pine needle-covered ground. 3 weeks ago, many of these same people had looked at her with suspicion and hostility. Now they were here to celebrate her union with their enforcer, to formally welcome her into the pack's inner circle. The transformation still felt surreal. Nervous? Sarah asked, joining her with an armload of wildflowers that would become Zara's ceremonial crown. Terrified, Zara admitted. What if I mess up the words? What if I trip walking to the altar? What if? What if Kane realizes he's made a terrible mistake and runs screaming into the forest? Sarah finished with a grin. Trust me, that's not happening. I've never seen a man more completely besotted. As if summoned by her words, Kane appeared through the crowd, magnificent in the traditional ceremonial garb of an unmated wolf, leather vest decorated with pack symbols, dark pants that emphasized his powerful build, and silver armbands that caught the firelight. But it was his expression that stole Zara's breath. He looked at her like she was a miracle, like he couldn't quite believe she was real and choosing to be his. You look beautiful, he said softly, taking in her appearance. Simple white dress that flowed to her ankles, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, the silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother gleaming at her throat. So do you, she replied, meaning it completely. Around them, the pack was settling into position for the ceremony. Alpha Garrett stood at the natural altar, a flat-topped boulder that had served the same purpose for generations, while pack elders took their traditional positions in a semicircle behind him. Are you ready? Garrett called to them. Zara looked at Kane, seeing her own certainty reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Ready. The ceremony began with the traditional words, spoken in the old language that connected them to countless generations of mated pairs. Alpha Garrett's voice carried clearly in the mountain air, invoking the blessing of the moon, the strength of the pack, and the eternal nature of the bond they were about to formalize. But for Zara, the real meaning wasn't in the ancient words. It was in Kane's hands holding hers, in the way their heartbeats seemed to synchronize as they spoke their vows, in the absolute certainty that they were choosing to face the future together. Kane Steele, Alpha Garrett intoned, do you take Zara Blackwood as your mate, to stand beside you in all things, to share your strength and your weakness, to protect and be protected by, until the moon no longer rises? I do, Kane replied, his voice steady and sure. I choose Zara Blackwood as my mate, my partner, my equal in all things. I offer her my protection, my loyalty, and my heart, freely given and never to be withdrawn. Alpha Garrett turned to her. Zara Blackwood, do you take Kane Steele as your mate, to stand beside you in all things, to share your strength and your weakness, to protect and be protected by, until the moon no longer rises? I do, she said, surprised by how strong her voice sounded. I choose Kane Steele as my mate, my partner, my equal in all things. I offer him my protection, my loyalty, and my heart, freely given and never to be withdrawn. Then by the ancient laws of our kind, and with the blessing of this pack, I declare you mated in the eyes of the moon and the earth. Alpha Garrett smiled. You may claim each other. Kane's kiss was gentle at first, reverent, but it deepened as Zara responded, pouring 3 years of denied longing and hard-won trust into the contact. Around them, the pack erupted in cheers and howls of celebration, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat and Kane's soft intake of breath as they finally claimed each other completely. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. Mine, he said softly, the word carrying all the possessive satisfaction of his wolf. Yours, she agreed. Then, with a smile that felt like pure joy, and you're mine. Always. The celebration that followed was everything Zara had never known she wanted. Pack members offering congratulations and blessings, traditional foods shared around a bonfire that painted everyone's faces in warm gold, stories and songs that connected them to the long history of their people. But the moment that would stay with her forever came later, when the formal ceremony was winding down, and she found herself standing with Kane at the edge of the firelight. No regrets, he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, her life had been simpler. Solitary work, no complicated relationships, no responsibilities beyond her own survival. Now she was mated to the pack enforcer and about to take on the most demanding security position the pack had ever created. None, she said finally. This is what I want, Kane. You, the pack, the work we're going to do together. All of it. Kane's smile was brilliant in the firelight. Good. Because I have plans for us. What kind of plans? The kind that involve making sure no pack ever suffers what we almost lost. The kind that use our partnership to build something stronger than either of us could create alone. His expression became serious. We're going to make a difference, Zara. Together. She believed him completely. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen each other despite impossible odds. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now that all barriers between them had fallen. I love you too, Kane replied. More than I ever thought possible. As they stood together watching their pack celebrate around the ancient fire, Zara felt a deep sense of homecoming. This was where she belonged, not just in this place, but with this man, as part of this family that had claimed her as their own. The future stretched ahead of them, full of unknowns and challenges. But they would meet it together, and that made all the difference. Chapter 12. 6 months later, Zara stood in the command center of the new pack house, watching surveillance feeds from across their expanded territory. The building was different from its predecessor, more open, more secure, designed with the hard-won knowledge of what could happen when trust was misplaced. Patrol 7 reporting in, came Kane's voice through the communication system. Northern perimeter is clear. Copy that, Patrol 7, she replied, making notes on the security log. Return to base for debriefing. Their new partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations. The combination of Zara's tracking instincts and Kane's enforcement experience had created a security system that was both comprehensive and flexible, capable of adapting to new threats while maintaining the pack's essential character. More importantly, their success had attracted attention from other packs. In the past 6 months, they'd consulted on security upgrades for 12 different territories, each one learning from the Midnight Ridge experience and implementing their own versions of the protocols Zara and Kane had developed. Long day? Sarah asked, entering the command center with 2 cups of coffee and a folder full of reports. Productive day, Zara corrected, accepting the caffeine gratefully. What's the latest on the Portland Pack consultation? They've agreed to all our recommendations, including the mate pair leadership structure for their security team. Sarah settled into the chair beside Zara's workstation. Apparently, our reputation for trustworthiness is spreading. It was strange to think that their traumatic experience had become something positive, a model for other packs to follow. But if their suffering could prevent others from experiencing Elena's betrayal, any word from the Seattle team? Zara asked, referring to the ongoing investigation into Elena's network. Sarah's expression darkened slightly. Actually, yes. And you're not going to like it. She opened the folder, revealing photographs and intelligence reports that made Zara's stomach tighten. The Seattle investigation had uncovered evidence of Elena's network in 6 different packs, with indications that the Crimson Fong infiltration had been far more extensive than anyone had realized. How extensive? Zara asked. We're looking at a coordinated effort spanning at least 5 years, targeting packs across 3 states. Sarah's voice was grim. Elena wasn't just a single traitor. She was part of a systematic campaign to weaken werewolf territories from within. The implications were staggering. If the pattern held, dozens of other packs might be harboring traitors like Elena, unknowing victims of a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything they'd imagined. What's our response? Zara asked. Alpha Garrett wants to call a regional gathering. Share intelligence, coordinate security upgrades, maybe establish some kind of mutual defense agreement. Sarah paused. He also wants to formally announce the expansion of our consulting services. Before Zara could respond, Kane's presence filled the doorway, his return from patrol bringing with it the familiar comfort of their mate bond. Even 6 months into their official partnership, she still felt that little flutter of joy whenever he walked into a room. What are we consulting on now? He asked, moving to read over her shoulder. Potentially the biggest security challenge our people have faced in generations, Zara replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. Kane studied the intelligence reports, his expression growing more serious with each page. This is coordinated. Professional. Someone's been planning this for years. The question is who, Sarah said. Elena's dead, Vera's dead, but someone was giving them orders. Someone with resources and long-term strategic thinking. And that someone is still out there, Zara concluded. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, processing the scope of the threat. Then Kane's hand found Zara's shoulder, his touch grounding her in the present. Whatever's coming, he said quietly, we'll face it together. All of us. Zara looked around the command center, at the sophisticated equipment they'd installed, at Sarah's determined expression, at Kane's steady presence beside her. 6 months ago, she'd been a solitary tracker with trust issues and a tendency to run from complicated relationships. Now she was part of something larger. A mated pair whose partnership had become legendary among their people. A security team that other packs looked to for guidance. A family that had chosen each other through the worst possible circumstances and emerged stronger. Bring it on, she said finally, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Kane's smile was fierce and proud. That's my mate. Our mate, Sarah corrected with a grin. Pack bonds, remember? As they began planning their response to the new intelligence, Zara felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. The future was uncertain, potentially dangerous, full of challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But she would face it with Kane beside her, with Sarah's brilliant mind supporting them, with a pack that trusted them completely, and a growing network of allies who looked to them for guidance. Whatever enemy had orchestrated Elena's betrayal, whoever was behind the systematic infiltration of werewolf packs, they were about to discover what happened when they threatened people Zara Blackwood loved. She'd spent 3 years running from the mate bond, convinced that partnership meant losing her independence. Instead, she'd found that the right partnership made her stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than she'd ever been alone. and she was done running. The hunt was about to begin. 18 months later. Contact established, Zara whispered into her throat mic, watching through binoculars as Kane approached the abandoned warehouse where they'd finally tracked down Elena's former handler. Target is in position. Copy that. Kane's voice came back steady and calm. Beginning approach. 18 months of investigation had led them here, to a decrepit building on the outskirts of Denver, where the man who'd orchestrated the systematic infiltration of werewolf packs was finally running out of places to hide. Marcus Vance, former military, current mercenary, and the twisted genius behind what they'd come to call the Crimson Network, had spent years building his anti-werewolf conspiracy. Elena had been just one of dozens of assets he'd recruited, turned, and deployed against their own people. But his network was crumbling now, exposed by the security protocols Zara and Kane had developed and disseminated throughout the werewolf community. One by one, his embedded agents had been identified and neutralized. Vance himself was the last loose end. Movement on the east side. Sarah's voice crackled through their communications. She was coordinating the operation from their mobile command unit, her technical skills ensuring that Vance had no electronic avenue of escape. 2 additional heat signatures. Looks like he brought backup. Acknowledged, Kane replied. Adjusting approach. Zara watched her mate move through the shadows with predatory grace, every step calculated to minimize noise and maximize tactical advantage. Even after 18 months of partnership, his competence in situations like this still took her breath away. Zara. Sarah's voice carried a note of urgency. I'm picking up chatter on Vance's communication frequency. He's got an extraction team en route. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this gets much more complicated. 10 minutes to capture the man who nearly destroyed their pack and countless others. It would have to be enough. Kane, you copy that?
Copy.
Moving to intercept now. What followed was swift, efficient, and absolutely final. Kane emerged from the warehouse 5 minutes later with Marcus Vance in custody, alive, conscious, and ready to provide information about any remaining network assets. Package secured, Kane reported. Area clear. Zara felt the familiar surge of pride and satisfaction that came from a successful mission. They'd spent 18 months tracking this particular monster, and now justice would finally be served. But more than that, they'd proven something important. The mate-bond partnership that had saved their pack could work on a larger scale, protecting their entire species from threats they'd never seen coming. Nice work, team. Alpha Garrett's voice came through their communications from pack headquarters. Bring him home.
Home.
The word still gave Zara a warm feeling, even after all this time. Home wasn't just a place anymore. It was Kane's presence beside her, Sarah's brilliant mind supporting them, a pack that trusted them completely, and a growing family of allies who looked to them for protection. Ready to head back? Kane asked, joining her at their observation point. More than ready, she replied, reaching for his hand. As they walked back toward their vehicle, Zara reflected on how much her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been running from connection, convinced that independence was the only path to safety. Now she knew better. The right partnerships didn't limit you. They multiplied your strength, expanded your capabilities, and gave you reasons to be better than you ever thought possible. What are you thinking about? Kane asked, reading her expression with the ease of long familiarity. Just all of it. How we got here, what we've built together, what comes next. Kane's smile was warm and content. What comes next is whatever we choose to make of it. Together. Together, she agreed, the word carrying all the promise and certainty of their shared future. Behind them, the warehouse stood empty, its secrets finally exposed to the light. Ahead of them, the road led home to their pack, their family, their life. And beside her, Kane walked with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly where he belonged, with his mate, his partner, his equal in all things. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, and everything she'd never let go.
The end.